welcome.
What they're talking about, and we've also heard from President Donald Trump about how the war's going and how long it could potentially last.
Yes, we have. We heard that from the Secretary of State. Another reason for this ongoing operation, stating somehow that Iran was hiding behind its missile batteries to continue to develop a nuclear weapon program. In U.S. intelligence would have some issues with that, certainly what it has stated publicly in recent months. However, President Trump spoke for the first time live to the American public. His previous comments about this operation have been on pre-recorded videos posted out on his social web page. However, he held a medal ceremony at the White House during which he addressed his decision to attack Iran and what the objective was. And this is what he says were the operation's aims.
Our objectives are clear. First, we're destroying Iran's missile capabilities, and you see that happening on an hourly basis, and their capacity to produce brand new ones, and pretty good ones they make. Second, we're annihilating their navy. We've knocked out already 10 ships. They're at the bottom of the sea. Third, we're ensuring that the world's #1 sponsor of terror can never obtain a nuclear weapon. And finally, we're ensuring that the Iranian regime cannot continue to arm, fund, and direct terrorist armies outside of their borders.
Donald Trump's there saying that this could go on for a number of weeks to 5 weeks now. As that happened, some advice, Mike, has been issued to U.S. citizens in the region, but somewhat through unorthodox channels.
Oh, very much so. Travel advisories are normally pushed through the State Department via its official page or else through a smart travelers enrollment program. Very seldom would you get a generalized travel advisory coming from an Assistant Secretary of State sitting in D.C., and that is precisely what has happened. The Assistant Secretary, Maura Namda, has issued a travel advisory covering a large number of countries, an exceedingly large number of countries. And this is completely against normal protocols. You do have individual embassies in individual countries who may issue an individual travel advisory for that particular country. But seldom, if ever, would you have an Assistant Secretary of State listing a host of countries to be covered under travel advisory. That is the job of the State Department. That would be published on the official State Department page. This is not the case. This advisory was posted by the Assistant Secretary of State on X, of all things.
Mike Hanna live for us there from the White House. Now, Mark Warner, the U.S. Senate Democrat, says that Donald Trump needs to explain clearly to Congress what the objectives of the attacks on Iran are.
When we are talking about putting American soldiers in harm's way, when we have American casualties and expectations of more, there needs to be the proof of an imminent threat to American interest. I still don't think that standard has been met. I think the president needs to come before the Congress, and for that matter, the American people, and decide amongst these 4 or 5 goals that have been laid out, what is the real goal?
Now, Iran's foreign minister says Tehran does not want to escalate tensions with countries in the region.
We are not fighting our neighboring countries. We are fighting American forces that are based in these countries, and the Americans and Israelis who are attacking us in every way, day and night. For the American bases in the region to move their soldiers to, for example, a hotel, it's natural that this causes an issue. We will use every method to defend our people. Our enemies attack us in many different ways, and we will do the same. In our view, this is not a regional war. This is a war between Iran and the U.S. that is unfortunately spread in the region.
Now, Iran's ambassador to the UN says the attack on his country is a violation of international law. Amir Saeed Iravani has called on the UN Security Council to intervene and reiterated Iran's right to defend itself.
Iran does not seek war. Iran does not seek escalation, but Iran will not surrender its sovereignty. The issue before the international community is clear. Can a powerful state attack another sovereign member of the United Nations with impunity? If the answer is yes, then the Charter is meaningless. If the answer is no, then this aggression must be condemned and stopped.
Now, joining us from Tehran is Hassan Ahmadian. He's the Associate Professor at the University of Tehran. I want to begin with you, Hassan, with that soundbite that we just heard there from the United Nations. China called a United Nations Emergency Security Council meeting where strong words were exchanged, and now you have this wording, very careful wording, saying that this is a violation of international law. Do you think anybody in the UN, in the Security Council, is actually listening to Tehran at the moment?
I think they are listening to what the White House has to offer more than them listening to what the Iranians are saying. So far, the United States didn't offer any real explanation as to why it attacked Iran. The foreign minister of the United States spoke about imminent threat, but when asked, he said, because we thought that if Iran is attacked, it will retaliate. That's why we were facing an imminent threat. The U.S., explanations are really vague. They don't have a case to make to the world. And ergo, I think the Iranian case is way stronger. It was attacked by the United States. Civilians are being bombed. School kids were bombed. Hospitals are bombed. So the world is watching what is happening. They don't need to listen to Iranian officials. It's a clear violation of international law. It's unprovoked and unlawful. I mean, that's very clear to Iranians and I think to the world.
Now, Marco Rubio was just saying earlier that if the US didn't attack, then Israel was going to attack anyway, so that's why it joined in the war. The prevailing kind of sentiment that I've heard from Iranians is that the Americans are simply fighting Israel's war for them. That seems to be becoming clearer as we go on throughout the days, but that still doesn't mean that you have a chance to negotiate right now, because you've got to capitulate to what Israel wants right now. There's no space for negotiations at the moment, right?
I don't think there is any appetite for negotiations. Iran negotiated in good faith 2 times, and both times led to a war in the country. I haven't heard from any official at this point, after the war started, that they are willing to negotiate with the United States and the aggressors. Actually, the head of the Supreme National Security Council just hours after President Trump said that they want to talk to me, meaning the Iranians, said, no, we're not talking to them and we're not willing to talk to them. After all, the country is under aggression, continuous, and the Israelis are starting carpet bombing in Tehran and other cities in the country. In such a circumstance, strategic culture in Iran tells us that they will not negotiate. They will stand firm and fight back, and then after a ceasefire, they will see where things go.
But Hassan, in order to get to a ceasefire, you need your allies on board. Now, the GCC states, the Gulf Arab states, Qatar particularly has been a very strong ally when it comes to, mediating with Tehran and the US. But Qatar's just shot down 2 Iranian fighter jets. The GCC's issued a statement saying military options are on the table. You're isolating the very people you are going to need if you're going to get to a ceasefire.
Well, of course, that's a very complicated situation for Iran. It had to make a and I think they made it already before the war, that U.S. bases and forces and interests in the region, in Iran's vicinity, are to be if Iran is attacked. Now that comes with, of course, complications with Iran's relations with Arab countries. But that, I think, a price that Iran chose to pay to keep its enemies at bay and hurt them further, not for Iran to receive attacks. I'm sure there is no case for Iran to target Arab states and its forces and its interests. That's clear to me. But of course, these countries are also very much unhappy with the reality that Iran is targeting bases within their territories. This difference to Iranians doesn't matter to a large extent because they are under existential threat. There's a big war waged against them. The main priority now is to hit back and force the aggressors to stop their war. And then comes the time for a remedy of relations with neighbors.
Okay, so that's the remedy to the, the relations with the neighbors. But you've still got to negotiate a ceasefire with the US, and at some point you're going to have to talk to Israel as well. Is that going to work in any way, shape, or form? How does that work?
Well, it works based on the previous ceasefire that happened in June 2025, worked based on a balance of threat Iran imposed after receiving really deadly attacks in the first days of the war. There was a balance. Now Iranians are establishing a stronger balance, hitting back really harder than the previous time. They are suffering harder hits as well, but they believe, to my understanding, that the cost for establishing such a widening of the war to Iran's mindset is that is going to lead to a broader ceasefire. That is to include other parts of aggressors against the country. That is, if Israel is to attack Iran or its allies in the future, after a broad ceasefire, the Iranians and their allies would hit back hard as they are doing now, because this lesson was taken from the previous highlighted. Now I think they see a broader ceasefire the way out, and for that to be achieved, they need to establish a stronger balance of threat vis-a-vis the United States and Israel.
But getting to that stronger balance of threat is going to be difficult because of the issue of miscalculation. I'm going to give you a scenario that happened. The UK said it was not going to allow America to use UK bases to attack Iran. And then Iran attacked a UK base in Cyprus, in Akrotiri, which forced the UK Prime Minister to reverse that decision. Now, Britain is in the war as well. NATO has said that it's not going to join in, but individual countries may well join in. That has to be dangerous for Iran, because you're just creating more enemies that are centered around the coalition with Israel and with the US. It's a miscalculation, surely.
The EU has basically extended.
Hassan, we're going to try and get...
was working against Iran.
Sorry, Hassan, I'm going to ask that question again very quickly because we lost you there, and it is a very important question. There's a dangerous miscalculation here, right? And this is got to be in the minds of the Iranian authorities.
Of course, that can drag and expand even further. But I was saying that the EU, the entire NATO, supporting Israel and the United States back in June. And the Iranians, as I hear from debates here, believed that Britain was involved in refueling U.S. and Israeli fighter jets are ready before being hit. And when they basically were being taught to have capacity, they don't have much to add to the aggression. And as such, the Iranians are going heavy against those who stand with the Israelis and the Americans and support them. There is, of course, a scope for miscalculation. There is a lot of scenarios to be reckoned with. But at this point, the Iranians see the United States as the prime target for their retaliation and Israel as a secondary one. And they want to force them to stop their aggression by force, be it through targeting them or those who support them in Europe or in the region. That has been the case that has been made by the Iranian officials. And I think it's working according to this case. I mean, the military apparatuses within the country is working against the aggressors according to this case that the officials have made.
Hassan Ahmadian, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for your thoughts. Targeting several sites across Israel. Israeli police say one person was injured in Tel Aviv after shrapnel from an intercepted missile fell onto the street. Earlier, the Israeli military said missiles were intercepted above West Jerusalem, Tel Aviv and Eilat, and at least 10 people have been killed since Saturday. Nida Ibrahim is joining us from Mullah in the occupied West Bank. Now, Israel said it's striking both Lebanon and Tehran. Any more details on why and where?
Well, these strikes have been focused tonight on the media outlets that the Israeli forces are saying that they're used as propaganda. These are the words of the Israelis for both the Iranian government as well as Hezbollah. That's why we've seen them send a warning that they're going to be striking Al-Manar TV station in Dahiya, which is in the southern suburb of Beirut, and that did not stop the channel from broadcasting after the strike happened. Al-Manar had been broadcasting from another location. We've seen also an attack against the area where the TV station, the main TV and radio broadcasting authority in Tehran was being struck. Now, at the same time, missiles from Iran made their way into Israel, causing, as you said there, Imran, shrapnel injuries for one Israeli, according to the Israeli police. The general feeling among Israelis is that the injuries are minor, that the ambulance service has mostly dealt with people who have been dealing with panic or injuries while they were heading to the fortified areas. But even though for around 6 hours after sunset, it was relatively calm, these waves of strikes continued again from Iran. And in the beginning, there was a confusion because of the Hezbollah announcement that they're going to be joining this war. That are these missiles coming from Lebanon? Are they coming from Iran? Ultimately, the confirmation from the Israeli side came that these missiles were targeted from Iran. And again, as we always say, there's this heavy censorship as to the real results and the impact of these strikes. It remains to be seen if they're going to be announcing about more casualties or more damage, because for now the Israeli police keeps reminding people to not share any videos that would expose the casualties or the amount of damage that has been caused by either the strikes or the intercepting missiles.
Now, Donald Trump, Nidar, says this could last 4 to 5 weeks. How's that going down in Israel?
Well, it depends on who you're talking about, Imran. First of all, you have the Israeli army that has been saying it's been prepared for all scenarios. It has called up around 100,000 of reservists, that it was ready for most scenarios, including opening a front with Hezbollah, saying that they're even ready to head towards a ground invasion. And many would say this is something that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been wanting to do all along, by saying that he wants to continue cracking down on on Hezbollah to make sure that the party disarms. But when you talk about the people, it all depends on how long this war lasts and how long they will stay in fortified areas and shelters. Because, for example, for now, in the northern areas in Israel, people spend around an hour inside these shelters. And if we compare that to the time during the last war with Iran in June, the time that was spent in shelters by Israelis is relatively much less than they are having to stay in these areas right now. That usually doesn't play well with the Israeli public. So it remains to be seen how much the Israeli and U.S. strikes have managed to weaken Iranians' missile systems and making them more or less able to send rockets into Israel. And that would kind of dictate the next phase and how the Israeli public is going to react to this war.
That's Nida Ibrahim live for us there from Ramallah. I want to take you to live pictures now from Beirut. You can see them on your screen. There's a black plume of smoke rising. It's very difficult to see, but it is there. And actually now we're seeing fires taking place. Now that's the Dahya neighborhood in Beirut that is under attack. It's a part of southern Beirut. It's traditionally where Hezbollah have had their political leadership certainly based, but it's worth pointing out here that they haven't taken over that neighborhood. Hezbollah came from that neighborhood. They were part and fabric of that particular neighborhood. So strikes taking place right now in the southern suburbs of Beirut. That black plume of smoke rising into the night. And just moments ago, a missile landing, or at least a strike landing, where there was flames and explosion taking place. These are live pictures, as I say, from Beirut. Now, Iran's been retaliating to the US-Israeli attacks by carrying out a missile and drone strikes on America's regional allies. Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain and Kuwait have all been hit. Qatar has responded to a Bloomberg article about its stockpile of Patriot interceptor missiles. Its international media office says, contrary to reporting by Bloomberg on Monday evening, the inventory of Patriot interceptor missiles held by the Qatar Armed Forces remains well stocked. It goes on to say publishing such false information without verification from official sources is deeply irresponsible, especially during this fast-moving and highly sensitive period in the region. Now, let's speak to Axel Zaibovich, who is live for us in Doha. Axel, there is now a growing list of targets. There's been concern in the region about the aftermath of attacks on energy infrastructure in both Qatar and Saudi Arabia.
Well, that's right, Imran. There's really a lot of concerns across the region, and because many countries are really concerned of the events unfolding. We had two separate attacks, one in Qatar, one in Saudi Arabia, and as a result, we saw that Qatar stopped producing stopped producing liquefied gas, and also in Saudi Arabia, some of the units of the refinery is shut down for the moment. But why are we saying this? Because it's got a big implication, not just for the region, but also for the international market. Because we're talking about the region that supplies a big portion of the world's energy sector. So we see that Qatar is the largest producer of the LNG gas, and that gas is being fed into European homes and is supplying different chains, but also Saudi Arabia is sending millions of barrels of oil every single day. So any disruption, it's not really going to affect just the countries here. It's going to affect everybody else across the world.
That's Axel Zaibovich there live for us from Doha. Now, let's bring you up to date on the latest developments. Israeli strikes in Tehran are ongoing at this hour. Iran's state broadcaster reported 2 explosions near its Tehran headquarters about an hour ago. Israel's carrying out heavy airstrikes on Hezbollah-controlled suburbs of the Lebanese capital, Beirut. It also ordered forced evacuations for residents in various parts of the country. Now, the US Congress is conducting a war powers debate over President Donald Trump's authority to bomb Iran. The Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, said he was very satisfied with the briefing and gave more details on the rationale.
the most critical point is that this was a defensive measure, a defensive operation. And why is that? I took some notes, and this is not classified, so I'll tell you what I think is important. Israel was determined to act in their own defense here, with or without American support. Why? Because Israel faced what they deemed to be an existential threat. Iran was building missiles at a radical and a rapid clip to the point where our allies in the region could not keep up. As you know, Iran has long vowed to take out Israel, wipe it off the map, and they have long seen that as a critical threat to their very existence. Because Israel was determined to act, with or without the U.S., our commander-in-chief and the administration and the officials I just named had a very difficult decision to make. They had to evaluate the threats to the U.S., to our troops, to our installations, to our assets in the region and beyond. And they determined, because of the exquisite intelligence that we had, that if Israel fired upon Iran and took action against Iran to take out the missiles, then they would have immediately retaliated against U.S. personnel and assets. We have troops in harm's way, and we have many Americans in the region, and that was of great concern. If we had waited for all of those eventualities to take place, the consequences of inaction on our part could have been devastating.
Now, U.S. President Trump on Monday warned Americans without evidence that Iran was building a missile that could soon reach the United States. And that's why he intends to continue attacking Iran for as long as it takes to ensure that Iran never builds a nuclear weapon. White House correspondent Kimberly Alkit reports.
Speaking for the first time from the White House since launching military strikes against Iran, U.S. President Donald Trump explained why he deployed U.S. forces.
This was our last best chance to strike.
At a medal ceremony honoring American soldiers, Trump laid out his objectives for the mission, dubbed Operation Epic Fury.
We're destroying Iran's missile capabilities. Second, we're annihilating their navy. We've knocked out already 10 ships. They're at the bottom of the sea. Third, we're ensuring that the world's #1 sponsor of terror can never obtain a nuclear weapon. And finally, we're ensuring that the Iranian regime cannot continue to arm, fund, and direct terrorist armies outside of their borders.
Following U.S. strikes on Iran in June of 2025, Trump says Iran defied warnings to halt pursuing a nuclear weapon and was using its conventional ballistic missile program to shield nuclear ambitions. Trump also explained why he gave up on diplomacy.
We thought we had a deal, but then they backed out, and they came back, and we thought we had a deal, and they backed out. I said, you can't deal with these people.
Well, good morning.
Hours earlier, the defense secretary acknowledged there have been U.S. casualties. He explained how Iran broke through U.S. defenses, killing 4 soldiers.
Every once in a while, you might have one, unfortunately, we call it a squirter that makes its way through. And in that particular case, it happened to hit a tactical operations center.
And the chair of the Joint Chiefs cautioned there could be more deaths.
This is not a single overnight operation. The military objectives that CENTCOM and the Joint Force have been tasked with will take some time to achieve, and in some cases will be difficult and gritty work. We expect to take additional losses.
President Trump insists combat operations are ahead of schedule. Still, he's not ruling out sending U.S. troops into Iran. He's also cautioned Americans that combat operations could last more than a month. Kimberly Helkett, Al Jazeera, the White House.
Now, I want to bring you up to date with some reports that we're getting from Saudi Arabia. The Saudi Defense Ministry says the U.S. Embassy in Riyadh has just been hit by 2 drones, resulting in limited fire and minor material damage. We'll bring you more on that as we get it. Now, joining us from Washington, D.C. is Gordon Gray. He's a former U.S. ambassador and Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs. Let's begin, Gordon, with the War Powers Act conversation. Hearings that are going on in Washington, D.C., the Republican talking points seem to be that we needed to attack because Israel was going to go it alone in defense of themselves, and Israel's effectively our greatest ally. Do you have any sympathy with that strategy?
I think that's a pretty convoluted argument to assert that there is an imminent threat because there's going to be retaliation against an attack either by the United States or by a U.S. Military partner. It doesn't really pass the straight-face test.
You know, that straight-face test, though, Gordon, is what the Republicans are really pushing out there. Now, Donald Trump has very clearly said that he's got these goals. These goals sound remarkably like Israel's talking points, Israel's strategy. So the view from Tehran is that this is simply America fighting Israel's war for it.
Well, I think that the problem that President Trump has created for himself is that he has not explained to the American people what the objective of these military strikes are. He had a golden opportunity last Tuesday when he addressed the nation during the State of the Union address, but apart from just a very brief mention of Iran, he didn't go into detail. And the other problem that he's created for himself is that the narrative keeps shifting. In January, he said, quote, "We are locked and loaded," end quote, to protect the demonstrators who in Iran who were being killed by the brutal regime as they protested for basic rights. So that was one rationale. Another rationale has been nuclear weapons, although that contradicts what he said on June 25th of last year, when he said that the United States has obliterated, I'm using the verb he used, Iran's nuclear capability. Even after the attacks began, the White House website continued to show that that statement that he was making, and added that any suggestion otherwise was, again, I'm quoting, fake news. Then we have the imminent threat scenario, even though the intelligence community, according to media reports, said there were no imminent threats. There's the question of ballistic missiles, but again, their estimates vary widely on what on when Iran might attain that kind of capability, and the idea that they're going to be able to strike the United States with that is a bit far-fetched right now. So that's why I think critics of the military action are pursuing the war powers resolution, because they think that it is incumbent upon any president who commits U.S. forces to explain to the American people, to their elected representatives, what the point of the military operation is.
But Gordon, for somebody like me, for somebody who is, a very long way from Washington, D.C., you've just told us that, American troops being committed is something that the war powers conversation that's going on in Washington, D.C. But these troops have been coming for a number of months now. So why wasn't that conversation taking place before?
It was taking place before. It just wasn't getting that much. It wasn't getting very much publicity outside of probably the Washington Post and the New York Times. But there were senators who expressed their concern and said that before there's a use of force, there needs to be a war powers resolution.
Now, that's an interesting point, and I'm going to ask you this politely, but surely if there wasn't people talking about it other than a few senators and maybe some specialist political correspondents, it's because no one thought that Donald Trump was actually going to do what he did, a full-on aerial bombardment of Tehran. It was just beyond the pale.
I'm sorry, so what's the question?
The question is, no one thought this was going to happen, so no one was taking it seriously.
Well, again, there were a certain number of people who did take it seriously. That's why they started the War Powers discussion in Washington. But this Congress has a Republican majority in both houses, and the Republican senators and Republican members of the House of Representatives, with a few brave exceptions, have shown themselves very reluctant to challenge President Trump on anything, any policy matter.
Now, Gordon, I want to talk to you in your role as a former U.S. ambassador and the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs. I want to talk to you about diplomacy. The view from Iran that is overwhelming right now is that we were negotiating in good faith. The Omani mediators said very clearly that we were close to a deal. Technical talks were going to take place in Vienna. Technical talks, for our audience, are where they get down to the nitty-gritty of how to do whatever is potentially going to be agreed. Then the strikes happened. Now, American diplomacy has taken a hit here. No one thinks that Americans are serious and will stick to agreements. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
I think it's fair for the Iranian negotiators to believe that the United States was not negotiating in good faith. In the first round of negotiations in 2025, President Trump gave the Iranians 60 days to come to an agreement. That's not a realistic timetable for an arms negotiation. I don't think there's a single arms negotiation the United States had with the Soviet Union or that took 60 days or less. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action obviously took years. And then again, we were in the middle of negotiations, and instead of continuing them, President Trump decided to use military force. So it's certainly understandable that the Iranian regime would follow the adage, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me.
But is that spilling over into diplomatic circles within the region? Because Qatar was mediating, they say, very successfully. There was also Turkey, there was also Oman. There seems to be a lot of people that were taken by surprise when it came to this attack. So the regional diplomatic spillover is also a thing, right?
I don't think that the Omanis were taken by surprise. And the reason I say that is the Omani foreign minister